I'll call the public hearing for the disposition of Lincoln Elementary School to order. Okay.
Good evening, Chairman Jellicoe, members of the board, and also members of our community that are here with us this evening. Welcome to your school district. Dan Celeroli and I, Dan, here right behind me to my left, we would like to talk to you just a little bit about the history of Lincoln, the ideas of what we would like to do in moving forward and making our recommendation to the Board of Education for this evening, and then also opening this up for public comment for our community to respond. So first thing, I'd like to share just a little bit about the history of Lincoln Elementary. And please know, by no means there's a lot of tradition that goes into a school. Schools really are the heart of our community, and so you can't really take an entire school that's been open for 69 years and put that into a few bullet points. There's a lot of kids that have went in and out of those doors at Lincoln, so please know, by no means are we trying to put all those kind of things and traditions that happen within a school and try to minimize that. We did want to, however, share some of the facts that we are using to help us guide that decision. The original construction of Lincoln came in 1950, and there were additions, as you can see, in 3 years that followed with that, with the latest being done in 1991. The building is 69 years old. It is our oldest building in the school district. We did some renovations on Lowell, and Dan will talk about that, but we actually tore down the 1922 section of Lowell a few years ago when we renovated that school. So that makes Lincoln our oldest school. The site that it's housed on is roughly 5 acres, and there's approximately 44,000 square feet that go with the building. We closed the school on March 13th, I believe, in the year 2016-2017 school year. And the reason for that was, again, it was our oldest school, and really there was structural decay in the building, and we'll go into that in a little bit so we can highlight for you what some of those failures are.
Madam Chair, members of the board. Okay, one of the things that came up was cost saving task force. If you remember when we talked about closing Lincoln, we had the several meetings we got together. One of the questions that came out of that meeting was, if you close the school, what will you do with it? At the time, we kind of kicked around a bunch of ideas, but the decision was made to close the school. That decision was made March 13th. That started a forward motion of discussion with our rec board, because it is a piece of ground that is used by the kids in the community for Little League football, some baseball practices, things like that. There's a playground there that is only maybe 5 years old. I put it in my first year here. But then we still, the question came up as to the building, the age of the building, what's wrong with the building. We've talked many times at this board meeting about FCI scores, Facility Condition Index. The facility score on this building is, I think it's ranked maybe 20th, if not even higher. It has a pretty high, the score of 0.375, which is not a good score. So as part of my facility plan, which is state statute, I have to provide a local plan and a state plan. One of the things that I put on there was the demolition of the building, at least to get rough costs. Normally this takes a while to get the process going. On January 9th, we talked again with the rec board and discussed again, if we demo the building, what would we be doing with the building? Activities for the community in that area, whether it meant putting up a building, a structure, whether it meant just raising it, filling in the ground, making an additional football field. We talked about select demo, which we'll go over here in a minute, about keeping maybe the restroom portion and the gym portion, and that way the community would have access to restrooms while they're doing, activities outside as well as inside. So that was discussed January 9th. June, all the way up to June 17th, we had another rec board meeting. Still, we did talk about that, and on the June 17th meeting, it was brought out that the rec board had given me the authority to actually pursue a plan of what we could do with that area, if whether it meant putting up a structure there, or whether it meant just improving the grounds in general. We had a facility committee meeting back in March. Same discussion. School construction administrator called me up on June 6th, and this was one of those unexpected things. We're at the leisure of the state and the budget. When they start filling in their budget numbers, they look at all the projects that they can get. And I know this because I sit on a component level scoring committee. We look at all the projects that we have, and we have to jostle those, because if you only have X amount of dollars, you don't want to say, okay, we spent this much and had this much carry over. They try to spend it all down. I was called by the school facilities construction administrator on June 6th, early in the morning. It was 8:10 because we were getting ready to do interviews for project manager. He told me, he said, I believe that I can get your budget passed. In order to do so, you guys are going to have to hold your public meetings. I know that you guys have been talking about this, but I need you to look at the demolition. Give me a cost of the demolition. We had already discussed the rough cost of demolitions. In fact, the state also gave me money to pursue and look at how much asbestos was in the building and identify the areas and what it would take to remove the asbestos. We did that months ago. And by statute 2115-116, we're required to have a public hearing, which is why we're here today. So,
One other quick comment before we move to the next slide. There's one thing about that cost savings task force in the year 16-17 that I think is good information for people to remember. When that time came, if we could just kind of preface a little bit, that was when the district was primarily going through extreme budget cuts, and that was through some of the legislative decisions that were coming down from the state to our school district. And when that cost savings task force actually made decisions for that, the recommendation to close Lincoln came through that committee as an option to pursue. So on that committee, we had community people and students, district people, and then it was through that cost savings task force that it was an option for us to pursue. So at that time, our community recognized that out of all of our schools, that was the one that was in most need of repair, and the one that would make sense to take a look at to do some other options with.
Okay, next slide, district-owned property. One of the questions that I get an awful lot is, well, why don't you sell it, or we can do this with that? The state statutes have changed. We can no longer, give property away for $1, like back in the old days. You have to actually sell it for what it appraises for. Okay, and while the building may not appraise for much, it will appraise for something. And the ground on it, really, for that area is worth quite a bit. One of the reasons why I don't think the district wants to get rid of it or can get rid of it is, well, first let me back up, because we've had questions about future school site. Okay, one of the reasons you cannot put a site on that location is because that location is only 4 acres. Or no, it's not even, it's 5 acres. But the state statute requires 4 acres plus 1 acre for every 100 kids, every 100 students that go to that school. So if you were to build a school to replace Lincoln, you'd be at a 3-section school, so you'd be just over 300 kids. If you're over 300, they round up. We would need 4 acres plus an additional 4 acres. We're in a deficit of 3 acres for that site. One of the other reasons that we can't, I'm going to skip one, then I'll come back to it, parking needs of the area. Because the city has certain parking restrictions, what we do in this district is when we build a school, if we don't have the land to accommodate what the city requires for parking, we share space. We share space with the understanding that we cannot have multiple events happening at any one time. Example, junior high, cab, Overland. We share spaces with the agreement that we're not going to have junior jazz going on the same night that we have a junior high basketball game, wrestling meet, and have meetings at this facility as well. You have to kind of alternate in order to accommodate the building code, the amount of parking spaces. So we use Lincoln's parking space as additional parking space for Eastside. So we cannot give that away. We couldn't sell that because we need the space for parking. The other thing too is, if we were to sell the land and even subdivide it, whoever buys the building is going to have parking. We need parking, so we would keep what we need for parking. They would have a building up there. They would need parking. There goes the park. And honestly, that's really the only park I believe in that area. Okay? That's one of the reasons why the next one, the district intends to keep the property. I mean, we have a playground in there, that area. It is really the only park for that entire area. I believe the next one would be if you went up the hill to Walnut. If you remember, we had inspections done to the playground area at the high school, and we had to take it away because it was in failure. Our insurance wouldn't cover it. It was the old wooden structures. The state of Wyoming will not pay me through major maintenance, allow me to replace that at a high school. Elementary school, not a problem. High school, won't do. Any questions?
Any questions?
Oh yeah, the reversionary clause. Thank you. If you remember, for those of you who were here, when we did the select demo of Lowell, one of the reasons why we did select demo of Lowell was because originally we were looking to sell that property. But there's a reversionary clause, which that reversionary clause is years ago when they had a deal with the railroad. The railroad gave us property to build our schools with the provision that if we were no longer going to be using that property as a school, that they took the property back. For those of you who are on the board, remember that conundrum we were in when we were trying to do something with Lincoln. We couldn't do it. Or Lowell, I'm sorry. And the only way that we can give it back, here's a kicker, we had to improve the property before we gave it back. So it left us no alternative. In fact, the cost of improving the property versus demoing the building was so great that the state of Wyoming, the school facilities told us, we're not going to pay you to demo it and then give you money to build something there or improve what you currently have to give it back. So that was one of the reasons that we decided, okay, let's do select demo, let's put some money into the building, and that was okay with the state school facilities. That's how we got the building at Lowell that we currently have. Okay, that revisionary clause does not apply. It's one of the few older schools that we have that clause is not in there. That school, that property was sold to us. We paid for it outright, and we didn't get it from UP Railroad. Okay? Now, going back to the FCI scores, and I know we talk about it all the time. FCI is Facility Condition Index. It's a state statute that every 4 years the state hires an engineering firm to go around to every single school building in the state of Wyoming, and they assess all the buildings based on an FCI score. FCI, they go in there and they evaluate. They have a 1 to 5 score, 1 being in failure, 5 being like brand new. They do 20 components of every school. So that goes from everything from the foundation to the roof, covers 20 building components. Over the past years, and this has been accumulating for numerous years, the deferred maintenance cost. Now, and I kind of put down here the cost to replace or repair the necessary building components would cost $2.29 million, almost $2.91. Okay, that doesn't include any kind of ADA, the FCNI score, which is Facility Condition Needs Index. So at this point, and this was in 2016, okay, if we came up with $2.3 million to fix, repair, or replace the things that are listed on the condition index, the school would still not be usable in its 44,000 square feet because of some of the other code issues that we would have to bring into play. The other thing too is when you're looking at these 2.29, that's, and you inflate it 7% per year for the last 4 years, and now we're coming up and we'll be getting another facility condition index. That will also identify more issues. So realistically, from my point of view, this 2.29 is probably closer to $4 million right now. Again, deferred maintenance, there, now we're talking FCNI, the Facility Condition Needs Index. The difference between the need index and the standard FCI is FCI is fixing up an old building and you still have an old building. Fixing up to an FCNI score means that if your child goes or grandchild goes to that school, he is in the same educational environment as someone who goes to Eastside or Stagecoach or Sage. It has air conditioning. And that's the biggest. And the big one is air quality. And in order to do that, you're looking at, and I kind of, illumination and lights, that's identified, but that would get brought up in the regular code or the FCI score. But you still have $1.1 million plus almost $500,000 in tech readiness. So you would add those two numbers to a dollar price of 6.624, and if you look down here, the 2.29, since it does not address codes, fire code, American Disabilities Act, elevators, what the engineers are telling me, if I go in there and I replace everything that is a low score, right now, or well, in 2016, it was $6.6 million. In order to bring it up to the FCNI score, the Facility Needs Index, you would add the 1.1 plus the 500,000. You'd come up with 8.2, almost 8.3 million dollars to bring that school up to a condition that is equal to our newer schools. And you would still not be able to inhabit a portion of the building. The reason is it's still 2 floors, and even though you have ADA access through the gym, it is a requirement that if you have 2 floors, whether you think someone will use 1 floor or 2 floors, doesn't matter. You still have to meet ADA requirement, which means you would have to put either elevator or a lift for wheelchairs. Then the building itself, you have your restrooms would need major renovation to be ADA compliant because none of the restrooms are ADA compliant. So dealing with ADA would become a huge expense, as well as fire codes, life safety codes. In order to address fire codes, you'd have to lower the ceiling, especially in the basement, even lower than what it is. And there's a portion for anybody who's gone to Lincoln where you go from the early 50s to the 1950 building. It's almost like going through a fun house because the floor ramps up and the ceiling ramps down. And it's all concrete. And everything above it is concrete structure. So it's not the most user-friendly to try to renovate this to bring it up to current codes. If you look at the $8.3 million, you're halfway to the cost of a brand new building. We have, and this cost was based on satellite. We're building a 45,000 square foot building. The end of the summer, we'll get started, and it's $16.5 million. Now, to some people, I think, well, that's $8 million that we're saving, but you still can't use the building. It's still not functional as an entire building. So it's it's just a waste of money.
This next slide actually goes through some of the things that Dan had just mentioned. We just felt that it was important that people knew that we did take a look at what if we did select demolition on just certain portions of the building. What would that do? And we needed to do that to effectively, one, present that to all of you in our community, but also to the state construction department for consideration. It's interesting, as this board knows, I've finished some schooling, and in one of the classes that I had, I actually chose Lincoln Elementary to do an ADA compatibility study for. Interesting assignment. The school failed every ADA compliant piece for it, except for the one wheelchair access into the gym. All of the other areas we did not comply. So much so that the professor of the class actually sent me an email and wanted to know the name of the school that I was referring to, and went online, saw pictures of the building. So the things that we're mentioning on here about the accommodations and the restrooms and the slanted floors, and when it rains, the water comes through the walls. Such as behind all of you trustees, that water leaks through the walls, not the floor, but it comes through walls. So we really are in structural decay. Yeah.
You know, one of the other interesting things is when the guy came around to score our walls, this was my first year here. And I wasn't familiar with the building, so most of you know Mr. Peterson. He took him around, and the guy scored some of the basement walls. Well, he scored the basement walls of 5, which is like brand new. But he did so, and this was the argument. What had happened was, I think, Nicole, you were the principal back then. Nicole was the principal and called me up and said that the walls were actually shooting water. And they were. They were shooting water 4 or 5 feet out, tiny little streams. So in order to continue holding school in session, I hired a contractor to come up, and we built a waterproof wall 6 inches away from the foundation wall. So the water hits that wall, bounces, deflects the water with a neoprene finish into a sump. We have several dry wells that take that water in, and we also have a pump that has to pump the water out into the, out towards the street. That's not taking care of the issue. That was doing something to continue school.
Indeed.
Yeah, so when he comes back, he'll see that, and I'm sure that our foundation walls will go probably to a 2, because it's based on percentage of square footage. Okay, playground equipment would remain on site. The demolition, the price that we came up with was, and this, like I said, this is an estimate based on RS means and actual costs as far as getting the asbestos abatement and remediator into there. The demolition fund, $880,000 is what we're requesting. No district funds will be utilized in the demolition, which is pretty common. We've demoed here enough buildings. You just don't spend district money on demolitions. Let me go back to the $880,000, because one of the questions that came up was, well, couldn't we use that money to air condition, the school? This money is earmarked for demolitions. If I needed money to go to air conditioning, that would be the component level. That's a CAPCON request, and you would make that request separate than demolition. Two totally separate pots of money. Okay. Untimely decision, not fiscally responsible. Right now, because that school is mothballed, we get 10% of what I was getting per square foot, which is now I'm down to like $10,000, maybe almost $11,000 per year to do major maintenance work on that building. Okay. If we don't decide soon, and we miss this budget request, which will be happening here we already had a select committee, you guys had the JEC, okay, so it's already on the way.
Yeah.
If I miss it, we're talking 3 years, possibly 4 years. Now, while some people might think, well, that's plenty of time to decide what you're going to do, for me, that's a nightmare because, well, for this district, it's a nightmare because I get $10,000 a year to maintain it, and the roof is leaking. I would have to put a roof on. I would have to do something with the boiler. I mean, there are things that would have to be taken care of in order to keep that building online, just to keep it for the next budget. Now, here's the kicker. If we do any kind of repairs with that, and then we decide, okay, we're going to sell it, Whatever money that we make off of that, because we use state funds to upgrade that building, now the state will take back all that money. That's state statute. So I mean, they kind of force your hand on the older buildings. But just to keep in mind, yeah, we can do anything, but it will come at a cost. The next steps, site plan process.
One of the natural things that people will ask whenever you talk about demolition to a building, especially a school, people will ask, well, what are you going to do with the property? What ideas do you have in moving forward? And so with that, that was where the idea came forward for a field house. Knowing that we are restricted by the site with the property, that building a school is not an option for us. The location of the property is good. You know, being right down the street from Rock Springs High School, right next to East Side, there are a lot of opportunities that people have and use, not just in school-sponsored events, but in community and extracurricular activities. They're always looking for schools to use our gyms, our facilities. So the natural question is, what do we do with that site plan? So that's where the Lincoln Fieldhouse came forward. And the name is not anything more than just something of what could we use to talk about this field house. Lincoln, of course, it represents the tradition of the school of what was there before. But as Jan had mentioned, what we're really asking for from the board is permission for demolition. The process in moving forward on what do we do with that property, that is a whole separate process in moving down the road. So as he mentioned, we do have approval from the rec board to take a look at options of what could we do for that. If it was a field house, what would the price tag be for that? If you added 2 regulation gyms, what would that cost? If you added different pieces to that. There is no approval from, and we're not asking from the Board of Education or the rec board, other than at this point to demolish Lincoln. And then again, that process on moving forward about what could be, that of course would need to have community input for that, so that people have interest in that and they're able to talk about what their suggestions would be for that. So again, what the site becomes is a separate process, but none of that can begin until we have the property to do something with. Also, one other thing before I move forward, I want to make sure that I mention anything that is recommended on that site to do in the future, it must go before the School Facilities Commission for their approval. So there's a lot of checks and balances on ideas for that property. People can have great ideas, and it takes is an idea to move it forward, but there's a lot that needs to go in moving that forward, and one of those is from the state as well as locally.
And one of the things that they're looking for is not just to give us their blessing and to move forward, but we have to show financial responsibility that we can maintain that property from there on.
Any questions? Any questions?
Hi,
Mrs. Thompson?
Chair. I guess I have a question about looking toward the future. So would the School Facilities Commission, and would that process be similar to what we went through with the satellite school if we were to do something with a building? Or how would that process look?
No, once you have all your ducks in a row and you kind of know, okay, this is the direction that we're going to go to, then it's just a matter of putting it on the school facilities agenda, going there and showing them, some sort of financial accounting, and they do it in a meeting over 1 month meeting. So there's no real weight to it. That's pretty fast.
Thank you.
Mr. Jackman?
Jan, a couple people have asked me about the field at Eastside and like the field at Lowell, other schools, right? And they're curious how we plan on maintaining this field when we're not maintaining a field that we're currently.
Okay, good question. If you drive by that field and take a look at it, you'll see that it's currently being dug up. And without going into too much detail, and I'll be happy to talk to you later on, I have to get with Mr. Lemage because of a state statute that allows us to have a 10-year warranty if we find that there has been something that has been installed and not been installed correctly from day one. And one of the things that we found was, to be quite honest with you, we've got a lot of fields and we don't have much of a crew. And even though they're out there cutting lawns, one of the things this year when we went to turn the water on was we found several leaks. And I told our maintenance supervisor, I said, don't get involved in fixing leaks. Let's call contractors because they can get to it faster than we can, and they do the entire job. We called this contractor. He came in, and it's a contractor that we've used up in Farson, Cheney Landscaping, and they seem to be pretty good, reputable. And he came in, and first thing he noticed was not only do we have one major leak, but we have many leaks. The next thing he noticed was instead of using 2-inch and then jumping up to 3-inch, they found 2 1/4-inch pipe, which he has no idea where they came up with 2 1/4. So he's having to adapt. So at this point,
That's just a question I
yeah,
have from people.
it's unfortunate. And last year we had some issues last year, but last year we went out, we bought aerators to make sure that we were doing everything that we needed. And it was actually based on recommendation of an outside contractor. And this year when we turned it on, that was the one school that we had an amazing amount of leaks. And like I said, they were all in the main water line, and the main water line is a size that, honestly, I've been a mechanical contractor for most of my life, and I've never heard of 2 1/4-inch pipe. And that's what we have in the ground there. So this is going to be an expensive repair, and I'm assuming that there may be legal action.
Thank you.
Anyone else? You mentioned earlier that you had looked at the gym and the restroom facilities and so forth initially to see if that might be a viable use. Then you mentioned that the lack of ADA compliance in the restrooms and so forth needed an upgrade too. So that's why I'm assuming we're going to a total demolition, is that the determination has been made that that's not a viable use of the building.
That's a great question. The other issue that we have there is the oldest part of the building is a steam boiler. And there's two things. And the steam boiler is the one that has been cracked. And we can replace the steam boiler, but what happened was it cracked mid-winter. And the lines, our steam traps and everything froze. So at this point, it's still expensive, but it's more economical to put in a hot water system. So you're talking still a couple $100,000 for a hot water system, just for the gym area and those restroom areas in the old 1950 area. The other issue that we had, for those of you who were on the board or might remember, if you remember, we had to replace the flooring in the gym about 4 or 5 years ago. And I think it was 4 years ago, because what was happening was when Nicole was principal there were humps developing in the concrete. And what was causing those humps in the concrete was we have so much water in the ground that comes up that there was electrolysis that went on, and the electrolysis decayed all of the conduit, the electrical conduit underneath the gym floor. They ran all the services. We had to have the service rerouted at that time. We had to cut the concrete, we had to drill or take out all of the conduit. The water, what we did to mitigate it, because we didn't know what we're long-term for that, was we just put a vapor barrier down and put kind of like a drain. But by no means would I say that this is going to be a 25-year fix. So the groundwater is another huge issue. Mechanical issue is evident, and plus the ADA. So yeah, that was pretty much a determining factor.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, thank you. Thank you. Okay, public comment regarding the disposition of Lincoln Elementary School. Anyone? Please come to the microphone. Please identify yourself.
I am David Joseph Fedrizzi, practically a lifetime resident of Rock Springs, and a long time, and I am the record-holding employee of the Wyoming Highway Department. I'm a professional engineer, and I have a great deal of respect for the case that Mr. Sorelli has built against that particular school, but I would like you to bear in mind that if you want to take the same approach, you can build a case like that probably against some of your newest schools and about, say, 75% of the buildings in Rock Springs. When Lincoln was closed, well, bear in mind, most of these things that Mr. Sorelli mentions, they were there when there were students still attending Lincoln. And the school was not closed because of any of these conditions. It was closed to fit into the particular budget problem that was faced with at that time. So there were actually students attending there. And as far as all these defects, you can build a case like that against anything you want to get rid of. I'm not saying that he did this to get rid of Lincoln School, but Lincoln is not unique with these defects. There are other buildings that people are using and inhabiting that have these same defects. What I wanted to mention at this hearing was I understand there's an overcrowding problem at the high school. And I wanted to know if consideration has been given to alleviating that to some degree by using the classroom space in Lincoln School as a partial solution to the overcrowding at the high school. The other thing that I wanted to mention is I'll be the first to admit that I'm an advocate of the neighborhood school concept as opposed to the current concept we've been on, say, for the last 15 years, where we have this massive busing of students. The massive busing of students concept was adopted, to my knowledge, if somebody can correct me if they know different, because the state was willing to pay practically 100% for school busing. So that concept was adopted because there are parts of the state that really needed some new schools, and it was not desirable, or say that new schools be built in these, rather to go to this massive busing of students. Now, I want to point out at this time that it's not impossible that you might have to, say this Lincoln School remains standing, have to reopen it as a grade school because the state is no longer going to be so generous as to pay for 100% of busing the way they did at the beginning. I think they cut back a little bit this year, and I think you're looking at having funding for busing cut way back in the future because various things have changed. So I would say that it would be unwise to demo any district property in case it was deemed more desirable, more fiscally responsible to return to the neighborhood school concept rather than the massing of the schools in one location and busing everybody in there. So those are the two things that I would like to hear how much consideration has been given to, is using Lincoln School to alleviate the crowding at the high school, and secondly, a possible return to the neighborhood school concept where you would actually need Lincoln School. And it's true, to fix it is expensive, but if you look at the cost, especially site acquisition and other things associated with total new construction, that's very expensive too. And once you do new construction, those schools don't stay new forever. Something goes wrong, or some defect can happen at any time, even with a new school. So I appreciate what Mr. Ciroli has done to come up with these things, but you're not immune for those. As a school board, you're going to be stuck with those things, whether it's new, old, but to keep the schools open is a big job, and it goes back to the concept of either neighborhood schools or a continuation of this massive busing. Thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you for your comments. Mr. Celeroli, would you address those questions?
Sure. Okay, first I'd like to thank Mr. Fabrizi for coming in. I've heard a lot about you. Remember, your boss is now one of my bosses. So, anyway, and I understand what he's saying. I really do. But from the school facility side, $2.2 million of deficiencies, and I agree, you've got a lot of buildings like that all over the state of Wyoming. But I only get $10,000 a year to clean a deficit of $2.9 or $2.3 million of deferred maintenance issues. So at this point, the way it works, for those of you who don't know, regular preventive maintenance is paid by the district. Any other maintenance that if our guys go in and I set a limit of $1,000, if it's a $1,000 repair, then the state will allow me on certain things, if it's repair and replacement of, or if it's a life safety issue, to use major maintenance. So, you know, the $10,000 a year while it sits there doesn't really cover a lot of the expenses. We replaced boilers here not too long ago, and we had almost $327,000 replacing a boiler. Okay, I just got prices. We just went out to bid for prices on recoating roofs. For some reason, this district has a lot of Stevens roofs. Stevens went out of business, and we have tons of roofs that are 12 years old on a 25-year warranty. So if they start leaking, now we have to coat them to try to get the other 10 years. Just coating a roof, and I'm talking 2 sections of the auditorium up at the high school, was over $100,000 just to spray coat. So Lincoln would need a replacement roof. I mean, I don't know how we would pay for it, because the state would draw the line and say, okay, some of these things we're just not going to pay for because of the age. The other issue is we're no longer grandfathered in for ADA codes and life safety codes. Back when they bought the school was mothballed at one time. And I can turn this way. The school was mothballed at one time. And then they brought it back when we had the overcrowdedness of the schools. Okay? 2 things have changed since then. One, the codes have changed, where I can't let that building sit for a year and then put kids in it without addressing ADA, life safety, and fire codes. That's a huge expense. The other issue that we have with the school is just if you, and grant, you know, before, when we shut the school down and we brought it in, you could just do that overnight. The reality is, this is the second Wyoming city that I've lived in. I've lived through all the booms in Evanston, and then I come here and we're kind of on a decline, but the population is still growing a little bit because of our median age is only like 33 or 35 years old. So kids, you know, people are having kids. So to address that anymore, it's not something that happens like during the boom cycle. During the boom, as you know, because you were YDOT, things happen pretty fast. The way it is now, when a school hits 90% capacity, I'm required by state statute to get the process rolling for a capacity issue school. The one way, and I agree 100% what you said, that the state's not being as generous as they are. The one area is capacity schools. If you are over capacity in your schools, the state, by the Supreme Court's Campbell decision, is required to provide you the funding for a capacity school. I go to almost every single meeting. Tomorrow, I'm missing the first meeting, I'll bet you, in 5 years. But I came to a select committee meeting, and one of the topics at the select committee meeting was, hey, they want to separate capacity and suitability. Now, what's suitable in this district is different than what's suitable in Cheyenne, Laramie, Natrona. I mean, it's all, that depends on your school board. If your school board wants to teach rocket science and you require certain equipment to deliver that basket of goods, then suitability could be an option. It could be one of the nerves that is going to be hit. One of the issues right now, suitability is not so much a determining factor, is because of the flexibility of suitability. However, when they come in and they give me a facility condition needs index, okay, that's the bare bones suitability. So if that means next year, 2020, when the state brings an engineer around, and if they go to that school is still here, and they go to that school and they look at it, you and I might agree. I went to an old Catholic school that was old when my parents were old and were young. Okay? But they made it work. In today's world, when these engineers come in and they make their recommendations, I will guarantee you that school will not be recommended as a suitable space versus any other school that we have in this district. I understand what you're saying about the older buildings in town, and we can make the same case for all the older buildings, except one exception. We're educating kids. And because of the Campbell ruling, that has turned education in buildings totally different than any other building that we have in the state of Wyoming. I don't know if that answers your question. I hope I did. But I mean, it's really not that easy to just say, hey, we're going to use this building as a school. Even modulars now. I mean, I had modulars in Evanston that were 22 years old. They worked fine for 22 years. All of my kids went to those modulars. And they were unsuitable, and they forced me to build onto a school. I don't understand their reasoning. I really don't. I'm a construction guy. So when they tell me to demo this or look at building that, that's what I do. And I hope I do it in the best interest of any district where I'm working. So those are the whys and some of the reasons why, while you have a good argument, the facts are there's certain things that would cost this district so much money. Even if I took it out of major maintenance money, I get $3.4 million a year for major maintenance. That's it. I've got over 1 million square feet. That's not a whole lot. We are severely underfunded. This last select committee meeting, I was one of the few who always goes up and talks, and I talk all the time about how we are underfunded for major maintenance. We're underfunded on daily maintenance through the WDE. So when it comes to other projects, security. Here, I don't mean to go off on a tangent, but I think you guys need to be informed. Okay? I get $3.4 million. Of that $3.4 million, once I address all of my priorities, my ones, twos, which we only have one, that's the greenhouse on the roof. We have all of our twos are mechanicals. Okay? And as I sit on the component level spending, almost everybody's putting in. They need new mechanical because no one district has enough money to go into a school and replace all the mechanical. Okay? So that's kind of where our twos are. So what they do is they give me the $3.4 million. They tell me I have to address all my ones, twos, threes. Then after that, I get 10% that I can use on enhancements. This district has quite a few enhancements. Okay, so I have to use 10%, so $340,000 I get for enhancements. We have 30 teacherages. Those are enhancements. Okay, so I have to pay for teacherages. I have to pay for additional gym spaces that this district chose to build on their dime. Well, I can use that money for enhancement. Then, 2 years ago, they said, you can use another 10% for security. Well, I'm all about making our schools safe. But they didn't give me any more money. They just allowed me to spend another $340,000. So you take $340 for my 10% for enhancements, $340 for the other 10%. There's almost $700,000 that they allow me to take out of my $340,000 and address those other needs. Now, last year they said, hey, you know what? You guys can take another 10%. So I asked them, I said, so you're allowing me to use my money that you give me, and there's criteria, but you're not giving me any more money. So So if you're not giving me any more money and you're telling me that I can make our schools safer with the money that I have, what do I use to improve the HVAC systems in an older school? Overland doesn't have air conditioning. It's got a 2. What do I use to change out all the windows? The high school got a 2 on the windows. You know, where does this money come from, let alone you have a boiler go out on an older school? I mean, these other things that come up. So I'm not dodging a bullet. I'm not dodging, you know, that's the reality. We don't get enough money, and if it was $6.2 million just by itself, where do I get the $6.2 million to invest into that building to save it? From an economical standpoint, from a district financial standpoint, it makes better sense to use state money to demo it than use state money to build it should we need something else. That's what the whole drive is with me. I have to look at it logically in dollars and cents. And I understand it, I really do. If it were my house, I'd be putting my last dime into my house. But at some point I would say, okay, enough's enough. Does anybody have any questions that they want to ask me or follow up? I'll be more than happy to address it best I can.
I have a question too.
Thank you for your good explanation. You've got a hard job.
It wasn't any harder than yours. So, okay, if not.
Dan, I have a follow-up.
Okay.
And this may go to the suitability that you were talking about.
Yes.
Okay, when we open a new building, we have to get an occupancy permit.
Correct.
Okay, now that that building has not been occupied for, a few years,
Right.
would we have to do a similar process to get an occupancy, occupancy permit? And would that even be a possibility without like the ADA and all those kinds of upgrades that we would have to do to even be able to put students back in that building?
Good question. What it would require is for me to notify the state that we're putting this building back, taking it off of what they call mothball, putting it back as a education facility. They would in turn require me to provide all of the safety items. I mean, it's like it's kind of like a checklist that you have when we close out a project. You know, when I close out a project, I have a 5-6 page checklist that I have to go through and provide them the information. Has this been taken care of? This been taken care of? So forth. And when it comes to life safety, one of the things that they would say is, okay, what are you going to do here? And that would be a conversation that I would have for State Fire Marshal. I have seen in the past where State Fire Marshal will say, well, if you're only going to use it for a couple months, okay. But for a whole year, no. I mean, that place doesn't even have a fire alarm system that dials through to dispatch. I mean, we would have to start with the extreme basics, before you did any of that.
Well, and that's my thought, what we would have to go through to be able to put students back in that building would be close to the $6 million?
Probably more.
More, probably
Yeah,
more.
Probably more.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Fedrizzi, did you get your questions answered?
Yes, I did.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Dan.
Well,
I can talk about the neighborhood schools.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
The other question that he was wondering about is if we're ever going to go back to the concept of neighborhood schools. And I just came into the district when they closed down a good majority of the schools and consolidated them. But I do know in, zoning the different schools, they tried their hardest, and we still do, to keep the area around schools as a neighborhood concept as much as possible. So a good portion of that area actually goes to Walnut, and right by Lincoln, we can provide the busing to Lincoln. There is a little portion that we do send to Desert View. Since BLM gave us all that land over here, that's why the new schools were built over there. But if you look at our maps, we really do try to keep the area kids next to a school so that we can provide as much walking or neighborhood school as possible. But the other thing that the district takes into heavy consideration when we're zoning the schools and picking areas, is we keep our socioeconomic status even at all of our schools. So we are not one of the districts that has a very wealthy school and a very poor school. And so we absolutely divide up our areas so that we can keep our socioeconomic status about equal at all of our schools. But we do try to keep it as neighborhood as possible, but there are some areas that are bused further. We try to limit that though, for sure.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question?
Very well, thank you. What is your name?
I'm sorry, I'm Nicole Bolton. I'm the Human Resources Director.
Okay, well, I have seen your name before.
Oh, probably.
Further public comment.
I'm Mark Cholak. I'm a teacher in the district. I'm also a community member. Those are the two hats I'm going to wear tonight. I feel like we're making a bit of a mistake here. As far as demolition of Lincoln, I think that case has been made. I think one thing I think of is just the tech needs of a 70-year-old building. I know some of the issues we have in the high school, which is 20 years newer. I'm full on board with the demolition of Lincoln. I think it's a building that served our community well for a long, long time. Eventually, everything has to be retired. I think we've made a bit of an error in putting out the idea of this field house concept because we haven't had any public comments about what we'll do with that land in the future. I'm already hearing people saying that this is a done deal, we're going to tear one down, we're going to build this field house, and that's it. I don't believe that to be the case, but that's what I'm hearing from people, from employees and from people in the community. And I wish we could just back off that idea of mentioning a field house or anything else that we would do with that property, because once you plant that seed in people's minds, you run into the thing with the 4-day school week where people say, see, that's what they wanted all along and that's what they got. And I never felt that way with the 4-day school week. And I don't think that anyone's made up their idea yet on a field house. But I just wish that we would maybe pull back on that until we've had some community comment on future uses. I think demolition and future use, even though they're closely connected, I feel it's really two different issues. I don't think we want to put the cart before the horse. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me be clear. We are talking only about the demolition tonight. That's what's on the agenda, is the approval of the demolition, and that's a whole different process as to what might go back on that property. And there would be public, after thorough investigation, if and when a proposal is made, that will go through a public hearing process, and that would be the process moving forward. So this is only dealing with the demolition tonight. Any other public comment? Going once? Twice? Public comment is closed. Okay, and so it is 5:59. I'm going to give my trustees just a moment to maybe use the restroom or something like that, and then we will convene the regular special board meeting. Thank you. Like I said, with people bringing yeah. So, I'm going to run this in a second. So.
How are you?
Good, how's it going?
Good, man. Going good.
Thank you for your indulgence, and it is 6:02, so we will open the special board meeting. If you would join me for the Pledge of Allegiance, please.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
If we could have the roll call, please.
Mr. Hay. Mr. Reedy.
Here.
Mrs. Thompson. Here. Mr. Jackman.
Here.
Mr. Mickelson. Mr. Batolo.
Here.
Chairman Jellicoe.
Here. If I could have a motion for the approval of the agenda.
Madam Chair, so moved.
Okay, it's been moved
Second?
and seconded to approve the agenda. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed, nay? The motion passes. We also have an addendum, so if I could have a motion to approve the addendum.
So moved.
Okay, it's been moved
Second.
and seconded to approve the addendum. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed, nay? The motion passes. Okay, we're now going to suspend the special board meeting and open the public hearing regarding the budget. Mr. Duncan.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Board Trustees, Superintendent McGovern. This is a time of year where we do a bunch of housekeeping on our books to make sure that we're staying in compliance with the state statutes. So what you'll see before you tonight, there'll be some budget increases and budget decreases. There'll be some adjustments to the budget book. There'll be some reclassification entries where we're crossing 1,000 level function code, and that is really because the state Department of Education, they care more about, we call them function codes, but it's items like that are broken down by instruction support, general support, whereas the federal government, they care more about the object code, that being salaries, benefits, purchase services, things of that nature. So in order to spend out the grant, a lot of times the special revenue funds, the federal grants, have to move money that cross those function codes, and by statute that the board has to approve those if we do that. So that's the premise for why we're here tonight. And I won't go through every entry, but I'd open it up for questions, but there are some that I would like to hit upon. The first one for the general fund, and there's that first little section that you see here. That one's mainly a reclassification for some teacherage demos up in Barson. There's a couple other little items there, impact testing, but not too much money. Most of the money's in the demo. You go down to the next section. That's the transfer to the health insurance fund. And the amount of the transfer is about 3.75, and that's enough to carry about a 15% increase on our health claims. And so by doing so, that gives us about 4 years of year-over-year increases as a reserve in our health insurance fund. Someday I hope we could be up to 5 years or so, and what that does is you know, if you look a couple of years ago to the kind of sharp cuts that we had to make to our health insurance, it would smooth that process out a little bit and give us more time to plan instead of having to cut millions and millions of dollars from one budget year to the next year. So my goal would be to have a 5-year reserve there. So this would be enough to give us 4. This money is coming from the unspent health insurance money, so we're taking the money that was budgeted but not spent and moving it over into the health insurance fund. So that's what we're doing there. The next section down, this is for the capital projects and the nutrition services. And currently, most of the departments have a 5-year spending plan, and so there are things that they cost so much you can't really budget in 1 year to do that. So this amount, and it's about 5.5 for the capital projects side of it, that's enough to fund the 5-year spending plans for maintenance facilities, for custodial, for grounds, for transportation. The biggest one probably is technology. That's where most of the money is going. There's also an additional amount for replacement of the furniture in our schools, as most of the schools, when they have desks, for example, that are not in very good repair, they try and rotate that around and try and replace one classroom or so every year. But if you're in a big school, that's a slow process. And when we went and sat down with the principals, that was one area that we felt was an identified need, is to start replacing some of those older pieces of equipment. We're still early in that process, but there's an additional amount, around $1 million or so, set aside to help us have a scheduled replacement of those furniture, fixtures, and equipment in the schools. There's also some minor things. For example, there's some equipment for the nurses and whatnot, because they're in the same boat. You know, a lot of times they have the same equipment that they had when the building opened up, and you know, it just wears out. So we've got 5-year plans for there. This transfer is funded by mainly contingency money and unspent funds. The biggest piece were for the bus leases. So we budgeted a couple $1 million, and we didn't, you know, we spent 2/3 of it thereabouts. So there's unspent budget money. There's some utilities, some salaries, benefits, supplies, workbooks, technology. So we're sweeping all of that unused budget money and then putting over to the capital projects. Now, what these do in combination as well is it helps keep us at that 15% level, because if we didn't do this, we would be sending money back to the state. So, as far as nutrition services goes, we think they're going to have about $150,000 of a deficit this year, of an operating deficit. And so that $270,000, that would be enough to bring their cash back up to where they started from at the beginning of the year, plus some additional seed money to help them get started in the new fiscal year. Part of the cash flow issue is they get reimbursed for the meals that they sell a month or so after they actually sell them, so there is a cash flow issue there. And also we wanted to make sure that the director has enough funds, enough seed money to get things going, so when school opens up that she has the needed equipment, everything that she needs to, there's money there to do that. And as a side note, that we were, I believe, the last district that didn't subsidize their food service program. That went away for us a couple of years ago, but that creates a little bit of an issue, especially when you compare the meal prices that we charge compared to some of the other meal prices across the state, in the sense that they've already been subsidizing there. So in my estimation, their meal prices are artificially low because they're being subsidized. And we held out as long as we could, so ours is still at a higher level. So just a side note there. Any questions so far before I go into the special revenue fund?
Any questions? Please proceed.
The special revenue funds, these are mainly the places where they're moving their grant money around so they can spend it out. There's one that I just like to bring to your attention. It's the DARE grant, and I think it might be a couple of pages in there. That it's the second page. But that's the money that helps buy the buses. And so the federal government, through this DARE program, as a reminder, we had 15 buses where they picked up 25% of it, and in exchange that we had to disable some of the old inefficient buses. And so that's what that is. The next item, down from there, goes after this page. Okay, this item is the other side of the capital projects transfer. So the first part that you saw was the general fund moving the money, and then this side that you're looking at now is the capital projects fund accepting that money. And again, the nature of those are the 5-year plans, and it's a good idea to be able to look into the future, so you're not having to cut in the general fund in a year in which money is tight to be able to have computers or replacements or fixed buildings, whatever the case may be. There's also an amount set aside, and this was in previous years. We do have some FF&E furniture, fixtures, and equipment set aside already for the satellite high school. And so, we're hoping that the amount that we have there marked there would be enough to enhance what the state kicks in for FF&E. Also part of this entry, we're capturing some interest, and there's some new state money for security cameras and security vestibules as well. Next section down, the enterprise fund. This is a food service part, so this is the other side then of that transfer from the general fund. They also had a little bit of a grant decrease from their fresh foods and vegetables program. They got a little bit of grant for meat processing up in Parson as well, but the bulk of that is capturing that transfer from the general fund. So then item F, insurance fund. Again, that's the reciprocal fund of that transfer from the general fund for those reserves. And that takes us to the end, and I'd open it up to any specific questions that you may have or any other Are there things that are on your mind that I can answer?
Any questions? Thank you. So any public comment on the hearing to amend the 2018-2019 budget? Any public comment? Any public comment? Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing and on the budget and reconvene the special board meeting. Item number 9 on the agenda, communications. If a member of the public initiates specific complaints or charges against an employee in order to protect the employee's rights to privacy and due process, the board will only hear those complaints or charges in closed session. The board encourages concerned individuals to file complaints using the appropriate district complaint procedure and appropriate forms, which can be obtained from the district's website. As per policies B, DDH, and KD, please limit your comments to the board to one time. So public comment is open. General public comment.
Good evening.
Please give us your name.
Sure. My name is Kelly Franich, and I am here tonight I'm a board representative for our swim club, which is the Sweetwater aquatic team. And I apologize, I take off my glasses. Like the road, I got bifocals this week, and I'm struggling to get used to them. So I can see you, but you're a little fuzzy. But if I put on my glasses, you're still fuzzy. So, but thank you guys so much for lending us a willing ear to listen to us tonight. Before I start with our presentation, again, I thank you. We appreciate the opportunity to have an open dialogue between our school district as well as our club regarding facility use fees. This is something that has recently come out, and I'm just here tonight to present the potential negative impact that these fees could have on our club personally, and specifically, I'm not speaking for any other clubs outside of our swim club. And tonight I'm just going to outline a few specifics. We have some club specifics. I'll give you some facility and financial logistics. And do you mind if I give you a handout? Just kind of, it's really rudimentary, but it shows the breakdown of what it would cost our club and go over some of the financial obstacles. And personally, I would like to say I love Dan Sullivan. I appreciate everyone in this room just for the fact that if you didn't love kids and educating kids and wanting to be there for your community, you would not be here. And we're in the same boat with our swim club. And so for them, I know that Dan has an incredibly hard job. I know I'm a business owner myself. We've done lots of business with the school district, and sometimes you have to put pen to paper and you have to try to figure out, and my husband and I, as business owners, have realized pen to paper doesn't always translate to the human side of things. And you're like, ooh, that looked good, but that might not have been my best decision. So I'll hand out my little sheet here in just a minute. But I just wanted to give you a few club specifics if you don't know much about us. We are, in fact, your local swim club, and we are the only existing competitive swimming opportunity in Rock Springs outside of the school district. So we have our junior and senior high girls and boys teams, and we have the competitive swim club outside of that. And one thing about our club that makes us different than other clubs is that we function and operate year-round. For those of you who have swam, who have had swimmers in your families, swimming is a different sport, and you have to stay in the pool continually. And the more you're out of the pool, the worse things get for you. You can't regain your ground as quickly. So by operating year-round, you get to compete on a consistent basis, even outside of your district. Once you're done swimming for the school district, you still get to compete and be out there and competing. So, and I just reiterated that, consistent conditioning provides a better trained athlete in the swimming realm. It's just a different sport, and it's how it works for your body. So The swim club has also been a resource for developing our current school district's swim teams. And over the years, we've had some amazing swimmers come out of our school. We've had some Division I swimmers sign on. And currently, most of our senior high, not necessarily as much the junior high, the senior high swimmers also participate in club swimming outside of swimming for the school district. So they understand the importance of keeping up those skills and staying conditioned. Our club is also open to all ages in our community. It's not just junior high and high school kids. We have a plethora of elementary kids that are swimming, and they come every night and they're dedicated, and it's really a really good outlet. If any of you have boys, you know that they have muscle energy that needs to be contained. I have 3 out of my 6 that my house is constantly buzzing. And I cannot wait to get them in the pool when they get old enough, because I know how well they sleep. But, just to let you know, we do have elementary kids, we do have junior high, and we do have senior high kids. And presently, we've got a couple of returning college students that swam with us for the summer as well, and one of them is sitting here tonight. Just to brag on our club just a little bit, we, in the last 2 years, have graduated out of the district and through club swimming 6 individuals that are currently swimming for 4-year colleges on scholarship. That is, to me, very impressive, and anybody who wants to pay for my children's education past high school, I welcome you to do that. So, scholarship is big, and one of the reasons they're able to do this is because they do compete year-round, and they do make connections within the swimming world. 5 of the individuals that graduated in the last couple of years are actually swimming club this summer. And I've met one of them. She was in Utah. She is swimming at a 4-year college. One of them is sitting here. He's swimming at a 4-year college. And 3 of those individuals have made the national collegiates for, and it's a big deal in the swimming world. They're in individual events, not just in relays. So just to brag on our club a little bit, competition is taken seriously, but it's also just an amazing sport. And we all know if you had kids or are raising kids or your kids are gone, you remember what they were passionate about. And swimming is a passion for a good number of our kids. And we want to continue to provide the opportunity to develop that passion. So I'm going to go on to some of our facility and financial logistics, just on how our club runs, somewhat of our logistics and just running the club. First of all, our pool options are limited. We have 1 pool in the district that's 6 lanes, and that's at the high school. So not only do we have our high school swim teams, we also have our junior high swim teams, and we have our swim club, all needing to use that facility. And in the past, when the pool was down and being redone, we utilized the college pool, but they could only give us 2 to 3 lanes. And we had to pay for every minute that we were at that college. So, and it worked out for us, but it was a time-consuming event when you're trying to stick 35 kids in the pool and you have 3 lanes. It's not the most enjoyable experience. But the other logistic issue that we run into is a time issue. Our swim club schedule is dependent on the district's swim seasons. Like for high school girls, high school boys, we're only able to practice from 6 to 8 p.m. We do not have the option of getting in the pool when the high schoolers are there or the junior high kids are there, because the pool is being utilized through the district for that purpose. So club takes the back seat and says we'll practice from 6 to 8. The other option logistic issue we have is fundraising. Now, Rock Springs is an incredibly giving community, but you know how fundraising is, and it kind of gets to be limited a little bit, and we're limited in our fundraising capacities at times. And a lot of clubs, swim clubs specifically, even in Wyoming and around the country, will offer swim lessons to cover costs, but we are not able to do that based on our facility use, the time for swim lessons. I mean, I don't know anybody that wants to take their kids to swim lessons at 7 o'clock at night or 7:30, and I'm not exactly sure, but I believe we've been told we actually can't provide swim lessons because we're based in the high school. And I could be completely wrong on that, but and correct me if I am. So one of the things about our club that we do have expenses outside of just paying our coaches. We do actually pay our coaches because they are a year-round staple, and it's not just a volunteer situation. I know that many of our coaches have volunteered in the past, but it's just beneficial to pay our coaches. So we actually compensate them for going to and from swim meets. We provide their accommodations, their certifications, and we do that also for parents that are looking to become officials. There's a lot going on as far as needing to become an official, and we actually provide reimbursement and payment for that, as well as our USA dues. To be a USA sanctioned club, we have specific things there as well. So we do on a monthly basis, to be transparent, we charge $75 per kid for swimming, which seems like a lot, but if you think about it, we swim 5 nights a week, you're getting a lot for $75, but we're breaking even to pay our coaches and just keep up with our fees. So that brings me to my handout, and if you guys don't mind. Just gives a breakdown of if we were to, there's according to the sheet, I think that they had a 6 p.m., like if it started at 6 p.m. And I actually threw in if our fees were to start at 7 p.m., just a cost breakdown of what you would see at the $50 an hour rate and the $22 an hour rate. Thank you for letting me know. Does anybody else want one? So breaking it down, I have an hourly rate. We have the hours per night that we swim. We swim 2 hours. The number of nights per week. So I have a breakdown of the cost per week that it would cost our club. The number of weeks we swim. If it were up to our head coach, we would swim 7 days a week. No, but it's just the premise behind what swimming does for you and what you need to do to continue in swimming. But we swim about 52 weeks out of the year. We didn't even take spring break off this year. And there are times that, yes, the pool is down or the facility's not available, things like that. But this is just a general overall, like this is if we did it every week. We understand that there's a monthly rate because we do use the pool more than 3 times a week. It would be $100 a month. 12 months out of the year, have that breakdown. So the cost for our club on that line, the yearly total for facility use fees across the board, the 6 p.m. rule and an hourly rate of $50 would cost my club over $27,000 for having 27 swimmers in our pool right now. And that's our average. That's why I went down, and this was a worst case scenario numbers if we had no fundraising available, or the more swimmers you have in the pool, the less it costs. But right now we're averaging about 27, and that would mean to cover that deficit, we would have to pass it on to our swimmers, and to just pay the facility use would be. If we did not tack this on, we would be spending more than what we could bring in, even with our best fundraiser. So if you guys want peaches, we're having a peach fundraiser, and they're amazing, but we're not going to make, even at the $22 an hour for 1 hour, we will not make $7,000. If anybody has the golden fundraiser, we would love to hear about it, but that's, for us, it would cost us more to put out for the facility use fees than what we could actually bring in, and that includes with our monthly dues as well. So just a breakdown. I understand as a business owner, like I said, you have to put pen to paper and you have to try to figure out how are you going to take care of this. I know what Dan is up against. I absolutely do. And I just wanted to let you know that our club would love to sit down with anyone, put our heads together to figure out what we can do as parents within our club. How can we help maintain the pool facility? We have a coach that is certified to take care of the pool. And for reasons unknown to me, he's not being allowed to take care of the pool. So I don't know what that surrounds or what that comes from, or if there's certain criteria that we haven't met. we would be happy to sit down with you and figure out how do we maintain this pool facility so that we could continue the use of it. It's just a passion for a lot of these kids. We have a small group tonight, but every single one of these kids lives and breathes swimming. And they're great athletes, and they're really great students on top of it. And we're proud of them. We want to see this continue. So we know that I just wanted to bring this to your attention and talk to you about it and open the dialogue. And we're happy to discuss anything, to meet with you, whatever you would like, to hear more or go from there. But right now, we're just respectfully requesting that you reconsider the implementation of facility use fees, because we're not the only club that would be affected by them. And with that, I say thank you for your time.
In answer to your question regarding the coach that is certified,
Sure.
the problem with that is that he is not an employee, and so that we have
Okay.
there would be liability issues
I
with
got
the
you.
district.
I understand. Okay, so I knew there
So
was
it's
something.
kind
I
of
just didn't know what.
insurance. Yeah, the liability insurance.
Okay.
So hopefully that will answer that
No,
question for you.
absolutely, absolutely. Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Further public comment? Any further public comment? Going once? Twice? Public comment is closed. Mr. Jackman, item number 10, the warrants.
Madam Chair, warrants for June 7th, June 20th, for check number 129671 through 130031. The total amounts were $3,210,662.22. I have no conflicts to declare. There is also an additional warrant in the addendum. Do you want me to do that now as well?
We'll do the addendum at the end of the consent agenda.
Okay.
Okay. I do want to declare a conflict on warrant number 129945. So I have a conflict. Any other conflicts? I'll entertain a motion then to approve the warrants.
So moved.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the warrants. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay? The warrants are approved. The consent agenda, item number...
Madam Chair, just curious, Mr. Duncan, were the requests to approve the checks, were that included in the warrants as well?
I'll say that again.
The request to approve the checks, once all the necessary supporting documentation, was that all included in the warrants as well? Or is it a separate motion?
I consider that as part of the warrants.
Okay, great. Sorry, thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
Consent agenda. All matters listed under the consent agenda are matters about which the board has governing policies, implementation of which is delegated to the superintendent. They will be enacted in one motion in the order listed below. There will be no discussion of these items prior to the time the Board of Trustees votes on the motion, unless members of the board request specific items to be held and discussed separately and/or removed from this section. Finance, 11A, approval to accept the budget amendments for 2018-2019. Personnel, approval. 11B, approval of personnel recommendations. 11C, technology, approval to renew Dreambox licenses. Nutrition services. 11D, approval to accept the bids for the purchase of vending machines. And 11E, approval to accept the bids for nutrition services equipment. Okay, is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that we approve items 11A through 11E. Is there any discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed, nay? Motion passes. Okay, the addendum. On the addendum, we have an additional warrant, and then we have some personnel items. The hire of Mendy Mays, the hire of Christy Novak, and the hire of Richard Baker. Is there a motion?
So moved.
It's been moved
Second.
and seconded to approve the addendum. Any discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Nay. The motion passes. Item number 12, board action. Approval of the disposition of Lincoln Elementary School. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Okay, it's been moved
Second.
and seconded. Any discussion? Anyone want to make any comments or discussion? Mrs. Thompson?
Madam Chair, I was just asked earlier tonight why I felt it was important for us, or myself, with this school to move forward. So I guess for me it's important because to see a building like that just continue to deteriorate isn't helping the district out. I feel that even though it's something that we may have wanted to see something different done with that building, it's becoming too cost prohibitive to continue. And so I feel at this time that this is the best decision that we can make.
Mr. Jackman?
Madam Chair, I know that a lot of people feel like we're being hasty. It's kind of came up all of a sudden, but the money is going to disappear if we aren't hasty with the decisions. I mean, I think if we don't make the decision before July 15th or something, it goes to the next person on the list. So it's a decision we have to make promptly and accurately.
Any other comments? I can see where, to the public, this may seem like it's a quick decision, but we have been talking about options. When Mr. Salaroli was talking about questions about the high school use of the fee, that was a question I asked 2 years ago. And so this has been a topic of conversation for some time as to what we could do with that land, with that building. As I said earlier, this is strictly the demolition piece. What we'll move forward with is a whole different process, and that will be decided at probably a much later date as funding becomes available. So, any other further discussion? Then I'll ask the question. Motion is approval of the disposition of Lincoln Elementary School. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Nay. The motion passes. Okay, the next item on our agenda is an executive session for the discussion of legal and personnel matters. There may be board action at the completion of the executive session. So is there a motion to adjourn to executive session?
So moved.
It's been moved and seconded?
Second.
Okay, and so we are in executive session at this point. Thank you very much for coming tonight. And again, there may be action at the completion of the executive session. Okay, we're here, right? Okay. Is George back on?
Did we even ask you?
No, I think we need to get him back on.
Yeah. Can we get George back on?
Thank you, Zach, for your help.
Hey, Mr. Reedy.
Hello.
To reflect that. Okay, so he's on? Okay, so I need a motion to return from executive session.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. Opposed, nay. So we are now back into the special board meeting. Is there a motion?
I make a motion that due to extraordinary circumstances, we are authorizing the district to make a payment to the Child Developmental Center up to $34,000 from the general fund and/or Title 6B, Section 619 funds, pending the completion of a signed 2018-19 contract for the routine screening and child find services.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, there's been a motion and a second. Any discussion?
Ms. Bolton, everything good?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed, nay. The motion passes. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
It's been moved and seconded, moved
Second.
and seconded to adjourn. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, we are adjourned.
This is getting good.
If I